Glancing over, I was astounded to see one of the jurors, old Lester Johnson, a retired teller from the First Bank of Eudora, clapping. So taken was he by Jonah's presentation that he was applauding. The sound was very loud in the room. Then there was a louder sound, the gavel coming down, bang! My father jumped to his feet. "Lester," he shouted, "have you lost your goddamn mind?" Chapter 104. Well, Maxwell Hayes Lewis said slowly. Then he rose from his chair to begin his opening statement. Those 3 words were all it took for me to realize what he was up to. Lewis was appropriating the style of Clarence Darrow, a Chicago labor lawyer renowned all over the nation as the lawyer's lawyer. Darrow was the most effective courtroom presenter of the day, his style casual, colloquial, at times downright homey, with ample doses of country wisdom and sentiment tossed in. Lewis scratched his head, then slid his hand down, cupping his face in his hand, squeezing his cheek as if he were sitting in his study, lost in thought. Then he appeared to notice the jury for the first time and ambled over. "Now, Mr. Curtis here says, and I quote, 'The pursuit of justice knows no color. The pursuit of justice admits only that which is fair and honest and true.'" He turned around and stared hard at Jonah, but when he spoke, his voice was gentle. "Thank you for saying that, Mr. Curtis. All I have to say to that is, amen." The jurors visibly relaxed. The lawyer had brought them to a point of tension, then eased up. "But let me tell you, fellas, where Mr. Curtis and I are absolutely not in agreement," he said. Lewis's face was glistening with perspiration, and he hadn't been talking a minute yet. He mopped his face with a handkerchief, a gesture that afforded him a dramatic pause. "We are not in agreement on the story itself. Mr. Curtis tells a tale of night riders galloping in and shooting up a house in a frenzy of violent and lawless behavior. I have another version of that story to tell you. Now, the story I have to tell you is about 8 upstanding white citizens of Pike County. 3 of them were wrongly accused and arrested, the 3 gentlemen you see before you today. But on the night in question, there were 8. They climbed up on their horses calmly, and in a neighborly way, they rode over to Abraham Cross's house. Why did they go there? Were they looking for trouble? Well, no. The trouble had already come and found them. He paused, turned around, and walked the other way along the jury box, meeting the eyes of each man in turn. Those 8 men rode over that night to investigate a complaint against Mr. Cross's nephew, a Mr. Richard Cross, known as Ricky, a Negro who was suspected of molesting and raping a young white girl of the Cedar Bend community. Now understand, my friends, that the prosecutor's story and this story fit together perfectly. The entire evening can be seen from one perspective as a gigantic misunderstanding. If the people in that house in the quarters had not shot first and asked questions later, if they'd all been informed that they harbored a rapist in their midst, if they'd known about the assault on the girl, and the legitimate reasons my clients had for going to Mr. Cross's house that night, well, none of this would have happened. But even so, it did happen. And it is a tragedy. And yet, gentlemen, it is not murder. I am here to tell you about Abraham Cross, a dying man, according to Mr. Curtis, although just for your information, he is still alive and well, and I wouldn't be surprised if you all get to meet him. I'm going to show you how Mr. Cross and his granddaughter and his hired gunmen, some of whom are in this room trying to intimidate you gentlemen here today. As he said this, he was looking directly at L.J. Stringer and myself. I will show you how this armed band of Negras and their white friends set about to deny my clients any access at all to the suspected man. How they, in fact, attacked my clients and sought to visit great bodily harm upon them, even though my clients had a written legal warrant deputizing them and empowering them to question the accused. They were set upon by a pack of armed men. My clients fired their own weapons, gentlemen, in self-defense. The case is simple. It's what is known in our game as open and shut. My clients are facing these terrible charges. They have been jailed and denied their most basic rights as Americans, as Mississippians. You could see the jurors straightening with pride as he said this, and all because of a story, a fable, a fiction, my friends. Mr. Jonah Curtis is a very eloquent lawyer, gentlemen. Anyone can see that. But what he's telling you is nothing more than a bedtime story. Several jurors laughed out loud. That is right, gentlemen of the jury. A bedtime story. We have two versions being told here. Mr. Curtis has told you a fairy story, and I have told you the truth, as God above knows it to be. Chapter 105. God damn them, Ben! God damn them all to hell! L.J. slammed his fist on the dining room table, rattling the crystal goblets. God damn their lying, cheating asses! L.J. was doing all the shouting. Jonah and I were standing back, watching him scream in a way only rich men can. We didn't try to stop him or calm him down. The biggest lie of all, L.J. said, is when he says these white raiders had some kind of official warrant to come into that house after Ricky. Jonah looked at me. All right, Ben. How is Lewis going to demonstrate that in a credible fashion? Easy, I said. He'll put Phineas Eversman on the stand. The policeman, chief of police, and the only full-time officer on the force, I reminded him. He'll put Phineas on, and Phineas will lie through his teeth. Jonah looked quizzical. I thought Eversman was on our side, or at least neutral. He was on our side for exactly one night, I explained. He only arrested those men because L.J. pushed him into it. He's been looking for a way out ever since. I speared a slice of Virginia ham before passing the platter to L.J. It didn't look like it would rain tonight, did it? Said Jonah. Not to me, L.J. replied. Why? That sure does sound like thunder outside, Jonah said. I walked over to the window and pulled back the drapes. First I was surprised. Then I was frightened. What is it, Ben? About 30-40 fellows with guns, I said, and a few with pitchforks. They appear to be just standing there, watching the house. That's a mighty big crowd for Eudora, L.J. said. No, I said, it's a mighty big mob. Chapter 106. The mob caused us no trouble that night. For about an hour they watched us watching them through the windows, then they turned and went away. Every few minutes I peeked out the window, but the streets of Eudora stayed quiet and dark that night. The next morning the trial began in earnest. I spent a long minute studying the face of Henry Wadsworth North, trying to match the man with what I remembered of the boy on the day Mama took sick. Too many years had intervened. This sallow, blotchy-faced fat man bore only a vague resemblance to the surly kid I remembered from Jenkins' Mercantile. Jonah called his first witness, Abraham Cross. Abraham was wearing his best church suit of speckled brown wool and a matching fedora. He rolled in a rickety wheelchair Moody had borrowed from a crippled neighbor of LJ's, a nice woman who sympathized with us. "Now, Mr. Cross," Jonah said, "why don't you take us back to the night of June the 14th? Tell us what you remember." Abraham nodded. "Well, sir, I was in the parlor, a-layin' in my bed, and Moody was tendin' after me." "Excuse me, sir," Jonah said. "Who is Moody?" "Moody Cross, my granddaughter. She looks after me." "Thank you, sir. Please go on." "Like I say, I was a-layin' in my bed, not quite sure if I'd been sleepin' or not, but then, sure enough, I come awake. Sound like the cavalry done showed up outside the house. A bunch of horses, I don't know how many, and men shooting off guns and yelling. Like to scared me half to death. And I don't need to be any closer to dead than I already am." Laughter rolled through the courtroom from whites and Negroes. My father slammed down the gavel to kill it. Abraham continued telling his story in precise, unwavering detail. Without any prompting from Jonah, he pointed out and positively identified two of the defendants. "That one there, I saw him through the front window," he said, pointing at the defense table. Jonah asked him to be more specific. "That one on the right," he said. "Stevens. He shot Jimmy Cooper dead." "You're sure it was Mr. Stevens you saw?" "No doubt about it," said Abraham. "And then that one there, Mr. Madden. He come into the parlor where I was with another one of them raiders, a man he called Harold." "And what did Mr. Madden do?" "He says to this Harold, 'You watch this old nigger real good. Keep your gun on his neck.' Then he went back outside, Madden did." "And the one he called Harold, he stayed there with you?" "Yes, he did." "Did he keep a gun on you?" "Yes, sir, up against my skull. And he grabbed Moody, too, not in a nice way." "And how did you respond to that, Mr. Cross?" Abraham scratched his old head, closed his eyes for a moment, then he spoke. "Well, sir, to tell you the truth, I didn't have to respond." "And why is that?" "Because a minute later, Ben Corbett came into the room, and my granddaughter Moody—" He stopped. "Please continue," Jonah said. "She pushed a kitchen knife into Harold's back." Chapter 107. "So let me see if I've got this straight, Mr. Cross." Maxwell Hayes Lewis stood up to begin his cross-examination of Abraham. "You were lying in your living room, half asleep, or maybe you were asleep and dreaming part of the time. You're not really certain. You woke up, or you think you woke up. You looked out that window and saw a man you thought was Mr. Stevens pulling the trigger on a pistol." Jonah said, "Your Honor." "Overruled," my father said. "This is supposed to be a cross-examination," Jonah said. "Could he get to a question sometime today?" "I said overruled," my father repeated. "Oh, I'm asking him a question," Lewis said. I'm asking him if I've got his story straight. Mr. Cross, you said